As to climate change, I think the president was fairly straightforward. That we're not spending money on that anymore. We consider that to be a waste of your money.
That was U.S. President Donald Trump's budget director yesterday, spelling out with brutal efficiency the White House's proposed 180-degree turn on climate change. No more global leadership or money from the world's second leading polluter. No strong efforts to curb emissions at home. The details in the president's budget wish list to Congress are in black and white. The Environmental Protection Agency would be cut by 31%, much of it right here, discontinuing funding for the Clean Power Plan, international climate change programs, climate change research, and partnership programs. Unlike most U.S. domestic political decisions, this one could hit people everywhere, including Canadians. But how? And in the end, how hard? The attack on the EPA and its climate change role is no surprise. Donald Trump has been scattering clues for months. First, on the campaign trail in coal country.
I'm going to lift the restrictions on American energy and allow this wealth to pour into our communities.
Once in office, scrapping a rule that stopped coal companies from dumping waste.
In eliminating this rule, I am continuing to keep my promise to the American people.
Then picking a new EPA chief who denies the impact of fossil fuels.
So no, I would not agree that it's a primary contributor to the global warming that we see.
That claim is contradicted by 97% of scientists who have studied it. But as Oklahoma Attorney General, Scott Pruitt sued the EPA 13 times. Now he's running it. So, with a new U.S. view on climate change, what's at stake?
If we are unable to rein in emissions so that the trajectories by later in the century are still pointed upward for emissions, that's a world which will be, as I said, for many countries and for many communities and for many people, simply catastrophic.
Among them, people in Canadian, coastal, northern, and agricultural communities. They face sea level rises and other extreme weather. Plus, scientists warned the premiers in 2015 that Canada is warming at twice the rate of the rest of the world.
It's been interesting to watch the evolution of acceptance of the climate change issue here in Canada and certainly globally, that it's taken a long time for everybody to sort of nod and say, yeah, we've got a problem.
The culprit is well known. Global warming caused largely by emissions of carbon dioxide, CO2. Over the past century and a half, global temperatures have been rising. Scientists believe it is key to keep that rise to less than 2 degrees. By last year, temperatures were already about halfway there. And the rate of change is speeding up. The 15 hottest years on record have come since the late 1990s. Trying to reverse that trend was the point of the 2015 Paris Agreement. The global community, Canada included, agreed to curb fossil fuel emissions.
Paris did contain a roadmap for forward progress, and it did have the strong commitment of the key players.
Those key players were led by the world's largest polluters, China, which emits about 28% of the total, and the U.S., which is responsible for about 16%. Under Obama, the U.S. promised $3 billion to help poorer countries. Trump will end that. Obama also created a roadmap for the U.S. to do its share. Here's one way to look at it. On a do-nothing, business-as-usual plan, U.S. emissions would rise by the year 2025. The Obama goal was to lower them and get them on a downward trend. Some contribution would come from policies in big states like California, while federal rules on things like methane pollution would help. But the key piece was Obama's Clean Power Plan, aimed at turning electricity plants, 30% of U.S. emissions, away from coal. That plan is Donald Trump's main target with yesterday's budget proposal, asking Congress to discontinue funding for the Clean Power Plan. Now look again at Obama's plan to curb emissions and shade in the areas targeted by Trump. U.S. climate change policy is suddenly bare. But if that looks stark, it's not the whole story.
People who want to actively protect the environmental legacy of the last few years, and particularly the climate legacy, should assume the worst and then be happy if things are better than that.
Two factors come into play. For one thing, the U.S. legal system gives opponents some leverage.
It would take years to repeal the Obama regulations because they'll immediately be sued in court, and in the meantime, those regulations stay in place.
But optimism could also be found in Donald Trump's preferred language, the economy.
I will be the greatest jobs producer that God ever created.
Because the jobs he wants to create aren't in coal, but in clean renewables.
You can deregulate, an industry, but if there's no market demand there, the industry is not necessarily going to take off.
And in addition, we're seeing rapid price drops continuing in the renewable energy markets, wind and solar, which don't produce any greenhouse gases. Those are going to continue.
Indeed, total U.S. investment in renewables hit $44 billion in 2015. Plus, other countries may now take the lead on climate action.
In fact, a country like China is partly in the climate business because they see the economic advantage of selling solar energy and wind turbines to the rest of the world.
So the U.S. may step out of the climate change game, but that might put it out of step with the world on policy and economics, an opportunity for others, like Canadians, to drive clean renewables, leaving Americans to catch up later.